on how we can exactly do this. Amit and Ravi, all yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Thank you for the awesome opening, and thank you for the opportunity to have me here and speak to this superb consortium. And yes, I agree with the power of cloud native solutions. One can exponentially bump up the overall efficiency of a company. My name is Amit, and I am with Sara as engineering manager, and I'm responsible for infrastructure modernization. And today I'm going to talk about cloud native solutions. Let me walk you through a scenario where the application is tightly coupled. Maybe the team started simple and the deployment mode was quick, but as the business scaled, things started becoming complex. Application evolution became tricky and operations took a hit. In a way, this application architecture creates close dependencies, making it more difficult to change, test, operate, and deploy, and as it grows over time. And I'm sure the majority of us in the webinar are aware of what I am talking about. I'll pause here for a second, and if you already know it, could you please type it in the chat? We are talking about the monolithic applications. Yeah. I would like to focus on the what if scenarios. It's a comparison of the problem which we saw in the last slide and the one which you're seeing right now. Now, this what if scenario says, can a skilled team hit more than 150 deployments per day from, let's say, one to two deployments per week? And the answer is yes, by automating the process of provisioning infrastructure through GitOps. That would mean faster and better lead time. What if we do a one-time solid planning and later, without much effort, we can reap the benefits time and again with built-in scalability to match any demand? This is attainable through on-demand elastic scaling or cloud bursting that offers near limitless scaling of compute storage and other resources. And this is a very good news as organization can invest more in application development rather than on infrastructure cost. And since cloud native infrastructure is more flexible and portable, the TCO, the total cost of ownership is also much lower. The economies of scale are passed through and shift pending from capex to opex. Cloud native gives you a choice of tool without being stuck with the legacy offering, so there is a less of a vendor lock-in. The what if that we just covered is what I will say. I'll say things that can be easily achieved through the cloud native solution. I'll take some more time to talk about the benefits of cloud native later in the webinar. I'm thinking I'm presenting my ideas in a weird way. I spoke about the problems and dived into the achievements. So I need a course correction. I should better start talking about what actually is cloud native. There are many definitions on this, but no matter what you read or know, we can always sum this up simply into 4 pointers. Well, as you can see from the slide, first is builds and runs scalable application in modern dynamic environments, such as any public cloud, private or hybrid clouds. Enable loosely coupled systems that are resilient, manageable, and observable. A technology that focus on minimizing users' operational burden. That's the main. Enables teams to deploy and scale component independently, so they can make updates, fix issues, and deliver new features without any service interruption. There are various ways to create a cloud native architecture, but the goal is always to increase software delivery velocity and service reliability, and to develop shared ownership amongst the software stakeholders. For that, it'll be wise to talk about cloud native pillars. As you see, like these are the primary cloud native pillars, and I can talk on them really quick. Microservices. breaking down an application into a collection of smaller, lightweight services that can easily be composed and connected to each other. Via what? Via APIs. Can we swap and recompose components to meet new business requirement without disrupting another part of the application? The answer is yes. How? By using microservices. Second one is container and orchestration. That's popular. Containers are lightweight, executable components that contain all elements needed. That support, I can say, build once and run anywhere, making development and deployment significantly easier. Container orchestration is also essential as the number of microservices grows to help manage container so they can run smoothly as an application that helps repair any failures and balance load between containers. DevOps. DevOps allows the development and operations team to communicate more closely and come together around a shared purpose, which is application builds, testing, faster release. Continuous integration and delivery, continuous delivery, CI/CD. Automation automation can repair, scale, deploy system much faster than people. Uh, CI/CD pipelines help automate the build, test, and deployment of the application change without the need to schedule downtime or wait for a maintenance window. I'm going to talk about, a few slides back, I promised that I would speak about some cloud native benefits. Here I am going to align myself with the Google Cloud ideology. Let's have a look. Starting first is the faster innovation. The intent here is to now bump up the productivity velocity and ease for the developers to innovate. And this can be easily achieved by following the cloud native approach by making loosely coupled services. The second would be the reliable release. Who doesn't want to get their products and services quickly in the market with reduced risk? The answer is, well, everyone. The cloud native architecture enables our team to swiftly build, test, and deploy new and existing services. Scalability. Through the infrastructure automation that takes care of downtime due to human errors, maybe, based on the demand, the load can be balanced, hence allowing us to optimize cost and better performance. Lower cost. That is important. This can be achieved through resource sharing, on-demand consumption, higher availability. Cloud native architecture provide high availability and reliability as they reduce operational complexity, simplify configuration changes, and other auto scaling and self-healing. Portability. Okay, we probably spoke about it a little earlier, but then yeah, it is a benefit of cloud native solution. Here, the application are designed to run anywhere, which makes them, I say, environment independent. Better security and improved compliance. These are my, my favorites, right? How can I say it's better? It gives you better security. This is pretty interesting. Through the cloud native approach, it is easier to patch and update due to the way it is standardized and managed. Yeah, thus helping to reduce the attack surface and with easy detection and the way it responds to the attack. Improve compliance. For a growing business, you do not want to ignore the compliance. Here with the cloud native, it is inexpensive and way easier to implement. The reason, way easier to implement. The reason is the majority of the data security controls are implemented at the platform level. All right. Now, see, nothing is perfect. Yeah. Uh, Yet we strive for scope of improvements. And it is important that we also talk about what are the trade-offs. The distributed system becomes a little overwhelming due to the fact it has a lot of moving parts. So in case we do not have the right processes, approaches, it can become really tricky. So that has to be kept in mind. Uh, we must have a good understanding of the cost optimization. Sorry, and the way and the way one wants to control it. Else, the tech cost may increase. So again, a good thing to think about. If you're looking for perfection, if you're looking for a high-end solution, this definitely means that you need to have skilled team, with the right skills. Else, we can go haywire. That's obvious, right? Uh, the biggest challenge that I feel is the resistance to the cultural shift that is needed to implement the cloud native technology. And I think most of you would agree to that. The resistance to the cultural shift that is needed to implement the cloud native technology and the DevOps best practices. And this becomes an extended debatable when you're proposing the same to your non-technical executives. Yeah. So what do we do about the challenges? Is it solvable? And the answer is yes. Cloud native computing challenges can be overcome by implementing strategies that can address the challenges. And this is the key to unlocking the agility, scalability, reliability that only cloud native architecture can deliver, right? Um, consider consider it as an ongoing journey, right, of constant iterations to learn and improve as you go. You don't want to come up heavy at one shot. So it's very important that we understand the tricky part of it before we try to implement, and it has it's a bunch of big advantages. Moving forward, I just want to make sure that whatever I spoke, I kind of present you a case study which justifies everything. So I would like to share two cases in which SADA, using its expertise on Google Cloud, help customer bump up their efficiency and reduce the cost. Okay, so first customer name is Fluten, and they are into media and entertainment. And what do? They live stream multi-stream pre-recorded session. Fluent services, I'll say the problem was the Fluent services were running on the virtual machine on Azure platform, and managing multiple virtual machine was getting pretty challenging. And so was the application frequent changes and the upgrades. They were seeing a scaling as a huge challenge. But through Google Cloud, SADA was able to set up a Google Cloud Foundation, uh, uh, and we were able to set up dev and production environment real quick. With the power of Google Kubernetes Engine and ISE, Flutin saw a 30% reduction in their operating cost. It is a number, it is some figure. And also, the error rate dropped up to 25%. So we enabled a self-managed infrastructure with security benefits. See it by yourself. You can probably read the comment from the CTO. My second case study would be of another top shot, which is RevUp. They are into software and technology. RevUp is considered to be the fastest growing hospitality tech companies in Asia. RevUp was looking to modernize its infrastructure. It had a legacy architecture. So probably if you remember my slide number one, which was like monolithic, so RevUp was looking to modernize it. So it's legacy architecture, where the services were running on a virtual machine and it had no orchestration engine. With SADA expertise in GCP, we were able to pull this up with a containerized application orchestration through GKE, Google Kubernetes Engine. Optimize resource utilization via auto-scaling based on custom metrics and metrics with best practices for infrastructure security. Till now, whatever I spoke about is just the tip of the iceberg. This session is going to be very interesting now. I would like to invite the very talented Ravi Ramachandran. He is a partner engineer with Google. So over to you, Ravi.
Hey, thank you, Amit. Thank you to the Starging team. Hello, everyone. Good evening. This is Ravi. I am a partner engineer working with Google Cloud. And of course, I'm responsible to ensure that SADA as a MSP partner in India, a managed services partner in India, is successful in the entire motion that we run with customers. So we tend to look at the customer through the lens of the partner, who essentially helps us scale the business, run the POCs for us, deliver for us, and of course, get the customer through the transformation journey. As we believe that we need to meet the customer where the customer is, rather than, you know, essentially pushing the product that we have. SADA essentially helps us achieve that, and we essentially in the joint journey have been largely successful in India, and we looking forward for that. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the insights, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity. Hello, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Give me a moment. Yep. Is it visible, Amit?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yes, Ravi,
Thank you.
I can.
Thank you. So yeah, so having heard from Amit, right, the advantages that cloud native technologies bring in and the way the customers can benefit in, we essentially now will come to the point of FinOps. Now, FinOps is essentially the conversation wherein the customers who have embraced cloud have seen the success both from technology and the scalability perspective. But over a period of time, they tend to feel that, you know, the costs have gone up than the way they have anticipated. So FinOps essentially becomes a practice that, you know, we work with partners like SADA to ensure that the customers implement it, or essentially use the, you know, tools that a partner like SADA has created. So what is FinOps and how is it important from a cloud you know, adoption perspective? So what happens is, from a cloud native perspective, the services and the solutions being offered by the customer and consumed by the customer needs to be tracked, and essentially, you know, there has to be a way wherein the customer believes that there is full consumption happening and he or she is paying for the services that they are actually consuming, and there is no wastage of resources. So how does this typically happen, right? From a customer journey perspective, there are two ways. One is a reactive and one is a proactive. In a reactive way, most of the customers essentially come to us from a reactive perspective. The bill, you know, after the end of the month is too high, or, you know, they essentially say that they haven't consumed so much, but the bill essentially is pretty much higher than they had anticipated, or they have anticipated and they essentially come, or they have crossed the levels that they feel, and they essentially come to us to help us optimize the journey. And we essentially, you know, need to give them you know, incentives at the same time, some offerings which essentially can keep them really lean, at the same time, you know, adapt to the cloud for the very nature that they are in the cloud. So that's essentially FinOps. The other side of it is being proactive. So once the customer who starts the journey as being reactive, once they adapt the services, they essentially realize that it's not only being reactive, being proactive in the journey is more important. So how do you be proactive? Is essentially create some tools and services in place so that ahead of time, you know, there are budgets, there are alerts that is being set, so that the individuals, the engineers leaders, possibly the finance team, the budgeting team are all you know, appraised of what's happening, so that at the end of the month there is no bill shock. So that's the journey that we typically see with customers, and we essentially have tools and best practices to make sure that this is a journey that every customer should adapt with us. Okay, so on the left side of the screen is largely the traditional on-premise financial governance, right? So you have an annual budget cycle, and then there's a centrally owned IT budget who essentially manage the entire capex, and the POs are being issued to the IT companies. The ones on the left are largely the traditional ways of, you know, on-premise atmosphere. On the right side is the services and the entire governance that is need to be changed, because, you know, the customers are now adopting cloud, because now there is, you know, there's dynamic changes due to migration. You might, you know, you migrate a workload to the cloud, or you possibly adapt a new service onto the cloud. You essentially would have newer consumption happening, and that essentially would change the limits. And of course, the way you need to forecast and the way you need to budget essentially changes a bit, because now you're now tracking on a month-on-month basis, or possibly on a day-on-day basis, because it's a usage-based service. Okay, so that's a quick view. When we speak to the practitioners who are setting it up, this is what we see. All right, the top of the mind FinOps practitioner issues are, one, I would say, they reduce the cost of, let us say, unused resources. That's one of the top 4 examples, right? What it essentially means is, let us say the customer has created all the right scripts in place. You know, there's a development environment in place, and there are scripts in place to ensure that the VM essentially is shut down after, let us say, the development activity is done. Let us say evening 6 p.m. there's no more development activity happening. The script is actually running, and actually they have shut it down. And in the morning when the developers arrive, again it starts and the VM essentially boots up. and they tend to feel that they are running a a lean operation by doing this. This is actually a real use case, right? But at the end of the month, the bill is still high. The customers tend to say, we had done what it takes, but are we missing something? So that's the time you realize that let's look through what's happening. Then the script, we realize that the customer essentially has shut down the VM, which is a very nice practice, which is one among the best practice. But the associated persistent disk, which is by default on, for the very nature of the service it is, hasn't been switched off. So the customer has, of course, leveraged the benefits of shutting down the VM, but the cost of the persistent disk is continuing to flow into their wells. So that essentially becomes one of the use cases, right? So understanding the technology and of course helping your finance team to essentially work with you helps you set up the practice. What are the priorities? The priorities, of course, are the ones which is top three. One is about rightly charging to the, because at the end of the day there's a cost center and the cost center gets charged by the finance for the services that they actually incur. So it's like taking an example of, let us say you're working for a corporate, you essentially take a printout. You, of course, when you go to the printer machine, you put your own passcode. That essentially gets charges back to your cost center. So similar logic essentially gets applicable when the finance team essentially is working with the individual cost centers. Okay, this is what is a typical practice being set up, and this essentially is a broad governance framework that we call about. So FinOps is largely about bringing together a cultural shift. The key piece here is the technology team and the finance team are now going to work hand in hand. The finance team understands the entire concept of billing and the consumption. The technology team is going to help them ensure that the technology piece is actually put into the puzzle so that all three of them work in unison. So that's around FinOps. It's actually a practice. Now, how do you set up the practice? The practice essentially is a full cycle in itself, as shown on the screen. On the right is actually the inform. You start from an inform cycle, so that because at the end of the day, you need some data to make some decision. So inform essentially helps you collect the data. Once you collect the data, you have the optimize phase. The optimize phase essentially uses the content that is actually collected from the inform section to make some optimized decision. Now, once you optimize it, now you operate and then you see the benefits of it, and then you essentially run the entire cycle. So this way, essentially, the FinOps framework is actually a cyclic framework broadly running across these three phases. I'll touch upon each of the three in the next slides. Let's start with inform. So let us say a day zero greenfield customer, is yet to get into FinOps, needs to get into basic activity of allocating resources and visualizing. How does this happen? So at the end of the day, each of the resources in the cloud needs to be having a label. A label essentially means that what is the resource, what project is it associated with, what is the cost center that needs to be built for, and all of them essentially needs to be part of it. There cannot be any resource in the cloud which is not labeled. At the end of the day, labels and tags helps you identify who is the owner of that resource and who is essentially going to be getting the benefits of the cost, or possibly handling the surge in the price. So that's the day zero activity that is expected from and then you essentially set up forecasts. Now there are reports coming out from our tools. These needs to be now exported in real time so that you essentially can use a BigQuery, which is a tool which helps you export the data and gives you information in a human readable form and in a presentable layer. So that's around the inform portion of it. Now once you have the inform portion of it, you now can, as shown on the right of the screen, you as a practitioner can set up budgets and alerts. So you don't need to wait for the end of the month to realize that the bills are over the air and need to start again. What we are saying is you essentially set up budgets from a cost center perspective or a project perspective. State that at 50% of consumption of the budget, it could be dollar value, it could be the resource consumption. Please send a trigger to me as a practitioner. At 80%, do send a trigger to my manager. And let's say 90%, send it to my manager's manager and possibly to the finance team also. I mean, I'm just giving you a logic. It could be the day zero trigger itself can go to my business team as well, or my finance team as well. So you set up triggers, and these triggers and budgets essentially helps you, track the budgets that you're in. Because you as a practitioner, you would have a technical lens, but you may not be having a consumption lens, which possibly is sitting on the finance side of the organization. So you set up alerts on emails and SMS and gather this so that essentially all the members are actually available and they can make some informed decisions as to. So the crux here is you're not waiting for the end of the month to realize. You essentially are being more proactive. So that's the guardrail to start with. as I rightly said, right, when we saw about the entire cycle, if you cannot measure it, you cannot actually improve it. So we have come to the measure piece of it. Now we come to how do we improve it. So labels, tagging, essentially, and budgeting alerts helps you to actually measure it. Now we come to the portion of optimizing it. Now since you have started measuring it, you essentially, now there will be various ways to essentially optimize a cloud consumption. So there will be like 100 projects there, and each one of them essentially there are different ways to do it. And as Amit rightly said, there are some of them would need some of them you would have done a lift and shift. Some of them you would have done a migration to Kubernetes and essentially done an application modernization. So some of them would be time consuming, some of them essentially would be, but at the same time, if it's time consuming, the cost also needs to be equally saving at the same, so to make it really useful. So essentially you create a graph as actually shown on the screen. The one on the right is more important, wherein there is high savings available. In some case there is high effort, which is on the top, which is a replatforming scenario, or could be a low effort activity. So on a day zero activity, you typically would want to target the easy hanging fruits, which is a low effort and high savings, and then possibly keep a high effort and high savings as the secondary side of it, and then run the motion on that side. So essentially you are running some cost out. So this essentially helps you to track the 80-20 piece of it. By doing, say, let us say 20% of the entire project, you essentially are saving 80% of your cost. So that's the logic that we are trying to derive to. Now when you come to what are the various ways to achieve it, right? One of them is, as soon as you talk of cloud, the obvious way is to essentially use some serverless technologies. You no longer are consuming a service from the VM or a compute engine. You essentially are using serverless, so that if there's an event which is for, let us say, 1 day, 2 day, or possibly it's a sale in a e-commerce website, you possibly would want to go through a pay-per-use model on a serverless. So you consume and essentially then you spin it off. The second way is, on a day zero, you would have done a lift and shift from on-premise to cloud, and you would have gone ahead and used a balanced VM for everything, or possibly a scale out VM for everything, or possibly if you're coming from a gaming company, you would have used a memory optimized solution to make an offering. But when you look at the entire offerings, right, some of the applications could be web based, some of them would be compute, some of them would be running an SAP application. So basis the use case, you may want to now differentiate the compute engine and use the right engine for the right purpose. Okay, so that's another way to essentially optimize the workloads, because you have the entire offerings available. More importantly is about cloud, cutting operations cost. As Amit said, right, a lot of cloud native technologies. So when we talk of cloud native technologies, we essentially are looking at cases wherein the operational overhead of running a compute engine or a database, or running an operations for it, say patching a database, is no longer a customer's cost, because all of them are essentially managed services from our perspective. They look at the customer needs to look at it from an application standpoint. So if it's essentially a cloud native technology that you're adapting, you by default get a managed data service. So it could be, in this screen is essentially the various database offerings that we are talking about. So the customer can go ahead and consume them directly. It could be SQL, relational, or it could be data warehouse, which is BigQuery in this case. Okay. The other way of looking at it is, it could be storage tiers, right? You're putting data into the cloud. Some data you are essentially retrieving on a day-to-day basis. Some data you just put it up on the cloud, and you possibly have using it for regulatory purpose, or possibly some governance purpose, and it's possibly pulled out once in a year. And since the charges are different for different kind of services, read and write, for the first variety, you may essentially put it into a multi-regional or regional, depending upon the use case. And the second use case, where you're not going to you're just putting the data, but you're not going to read it, possibly not less than once in a year, you may want to use it a cold line service. So this way essentially bases the use case. In the earlier slide we decided the compute engine. In this case, we decided the storage. So the offerings are available, and the technical hat essentially helps the finance team to make it really smart. Next comes the networking design, right? Now there are zones, there are regions on which the cloud services are being built, and it could be a case that let us say the development team decides not to use a premier tier. A premier tier is typically used for production, which essentially gives you SLA specific latencies between regions and zones. but a standard tier essentially helps you with a cheaper option. Same is the case with media content. Let us say the customer or the enterprise is running, let us say an IPL or some advertisements. Instead of using the typical solution, why not use a CDN? The CDN essentially helps you deliver the service from the nearest edge node, so that you essentially are reducing on the egress cost from the backend zones and regions. So these are some of the ways from a networking lens. So we have seen through the lens of the database, or possibly a compute engine, or also storage. These are some of the tips that we are given. Of course, there are a lot of other ways to do it, and each of the service has their own ways. Now, from a customer standpoint, this is another beautiful example wherein there are different types of workloads. The workloads could be ephemeral or non-ephemeral. What it essentially means is, let us say the customer is trying to run a batch workload which runs, let us say, for 1 minute or 2 minutes. And then there's a customer who runs essentially compute engine, which needs to be a web service which works 24 hours a day. In the first use case, you need a compute engine only for, say, 2 minutes. So these are called as stateless workloads. In these kind of case, the customer can very well go and select a spot VM. A spot VM can be like 80-90% discounted, but yeah, it's there only for, say, a couple of minutes, and it goes down, with an SLA there. So if you want to run a batch, why don't you use a spot VM? And at the same time, on the left side, you essentially look at the workloads which, like, let us say, web services or SAP. You may want to find out what is the kind of commitments that you have with the cloud provider. On the left is on demand, wherein, let us say, you're not aware that how long you want to run, but you know that it needs to be running 24 hours a day and possibly 30 days a month. You may essentially go for an on demand. So on demand also has some discounting mechanisms there. But you're pretty much confident that this workload is pretty important and would run for next 3 years. You may want to go through a committed use discount. So committed use discount essentially gives you you essentially commit, the offering with us for, let us say, 1 year or 3 year, and we essentially give you a deep discount along with the compute essentially which is being committed for you. So this is on the compute side of it, and all of them essentially is now integrated into a FinOps hub. A FinOps hub essentially is a beautiful GUI which is part of our console, which helps you run through these recommendations and gives you the optimizations that you have achieved as well. And since there is AI and ML inbuilt, it essentially gives you a tool called as Agent Assist, which will proactively help you identify and recommend. When I say recommend, if there are some ideal VMs, it will help you, it would have realized that the VM is being not used for 15 days. It will give you recommendations if you want to downsize or possibly use a different machine. Detach disk, which is the first example that we took in the start of the conversation. Detach some disks which are essentially just lying idle, or some projects which are not attended. And since we put a label on the start of it, it's easy to identify the cost center that has actually, used that particular project. So these are the various ways that a workload recommendation helps you. So it's an entire cycle that you could see. You label it well, you put some triggers, you essentially use these tools to make it happen across this stack, right? It could be infra, it could be database, or it could be application. And then coming from an operate standpoint, now we essentially have spoken about optimize, 7 or 8 ways to optimize. These are not the entire one, there are about 80 or 90. I'll share you a couple of links in the blogs that gives you each one of the best practices that we recommend. We essentially are looking at individual accountability, because now with FinOps practice, it's a joint team of finance and the technical team working together to ensure that the cloud spending across team is actually well informed. And at the end of the day, some teams, as we have given you tools, at the end of the day, there are teams that would have achieved a lot of success in optimization, at the same time give you business results. Why not reward some employees? That essentially helps the other teams to keep up the track, and essentially, so that's gamification. That's one portion to do it. Two is, some team essentially has created a script or a knowledge base. Why not share it across the community within the organization and run a blameless postmortem? So every time there's a cost issue, instead of the technical team, for pointing fingers at the business team and the business team looking at the finance, we should run a blameless postmortem, because these are some innovations that cloud brings in, right? And individuals out of innovative mindsets would want to spin up something, and they from an engineering mindset, they don't realize the cost involved behind that. So running a postmortem which is blameless, and then sharing the collaboration across the community essentially brings in that culture. So it would take like 2 or 3 months of rigorous practice of the entire cycle to make it happen. And the last one, as Amit actually said, us moving from infrastructure to essentially application development is actually the key, right? When you're using the cloud native technologies, which are serverless and managed, which helps you bring down a lot of operational expenses from the organization perspective. So that's key. That's a key. And these are essentially some of the white papers that we have published in the recent past. There was one which was published last week also. These are essentially helping you go through each of the journey from an application standpoint, infrastructure, database, or analytics, to come down and possibly help you achieve the goals that you have actually migrated to the cloud. And the intent is about helping you save cost at the same time being successful in the business goals that you have set it for yourselves. Okay, so that's pretty much about it. I'll take a pause for possibly questions that we can take through.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Amit. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time when you can start asking your questions. You can put them in the chat box and we'll have them addressed right here. And I do see that there is one question that has come in. Amit, this one's directed to you. And we want to understand if there are any potential disruptions during the migration process that organizations may face. And if so, what are the best practices that you would recommend for a smooth transition to cloud?
Okay, I hope you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. I was talking about how tricky a cloud native approach can be earlier, right? So I probably spoke about implementing strategies that can address the challenges. So I'll recommend we should plan, one should plan the migration in a way that do not start big and sudden. Rather, it should be in phases. So consider a best practice as a wave migration strategy where we pick up gradual migrations of application and workloads. And very soon you will realize this approach provides an opportunity to optimize your cloud capabilities and address any unforeseen challenges before migrating more critical applications. So, yep, this is something I would recommend.
Thank you very much, Amit. Well, there are a few more questions. Ravi, this one is directed to you. And our attendees actually want to know what challenges might organizations actually face in terms of cost management when transitioning to the cloud. And what are the strategies that can be actually employed to optimize this spend?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the point is most of the organizations that come from an on-premise mindset essentially have a different accounting mechanism where it's largely the capex versus the opex conversation, right? In a cloud conversation, largely you pay for what you consume. That's the very reason you actually get into the cloud. And two is of course the technology that it brings in. From a customer standpoint, what happens is people continue to look at it from the lens that it has been paid up for, so we essentially can consume. It's like you walk out of the room without switching off the fan or the electricity, and then you realize that okay, the bill is one time, and then you move on. But when you come to cloud, right, when you leave the room, essentially you're supposed to switch off the light and the fan so that you essentially are paying for what you consume. So that is one of the mindset that we tend to see that the customer need to adopt, and it has to be coming from the finance side, collaborating with the practitioners.
There's one that's actually coming on the security piece, and either one of you, whoever wants to take this one, it's open. So basically what we want to know is how does cloud FinOps intersect with cloud security and compliance, and what are the steps that would be taken to ensure that financial operations align with these requirements?
Okay, so when it comes to security, right, so security is largely about, let us take an example of storage, right? From a security standpoint, we tend to store a lot of logs and information and audit trails and so on and so forth. All of those in an on-premise environment would be actually part of a storage which is part of the on-premise itself. But when you come to cloud, you essentially are putting in a storage which is archive or could be a nearline or a cold line. So from a security standpoint, it's always necessary that we understand the amount of volumes of data, because you're being charged for the volumes of data. You essentially understand what's the quantity of data that is being ingested, and how much of data is going to be actually consumed. This needs to be put into factor when you actually design the entire security portfolio from a customer standpoint. Two is retrieving the data. There's so much of data that is actually sitting in the customers, and let us say there is an incident or a breach or an audit. How soon can you recover it? So essentially, security brings in the concept of how soon can you detect and mitigate a breach. FinOps essentially helps you drive that collaboration between the teams so that you actually are using the right tools from a perspective. You may not want to look at the data which is like 2 years back, but you need to still keep it because it's from an audit standpoint. So FinOps and security, of course, still continue to work in parallel. But whenever there's a breach, of course, then you need to retrieve, and then the cost can be can be high to moderate. So that's the lens that one needs to look through it. And there are other use cases that we can speak through it. I can share my email ID and we can have a deeper conversation on the use case there.
Absolutely. So I'm hoping that this is answering questions for all our audiences, and I'm seeing that there are a few more, so I'm going to take that up as well. Amit, this next one's directed to you. What are the key performance indicators that executives should track to measure the success and impact of cloud initiatives, especially on business outcomes?
That is a very good question. So, yeah, I would primarily think of 3 points, right? You can say that one is cloud strategy and business strategy alignment. So there has to be alignment between them. This is one of the important KPIs. Have well-defined and automated governance policies that are consistently monitoring the KPIs to ensure long-term success. This is one of those. Time to cloud could be the one. This can help you understand how quickly your organization is able to provision the resources needed for new project and identify areas where the processes can be streamlined. And third would be probably measurement of cloud optimization. Having a robust cloud cost optimization practices like right sizing, elimination of infrastructure which is not at all needed, like zombie, right? I like the example what Ravi said. We just go out of the room without turning off the fan. Under this optimization, we can also think about reservation management. So optimization is just about the cost thing. So yeah, I would primarily like to sum this up into 3 points. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for your insights on that. And with that, the next question, and this again is open for either one of you. How do you promote collaboration between finance, operations, and engineering teams within the organization in context of cloud FinOps?
Thank you. Well, the key piece is right here. Essentially, there's nobody sitting on the other side of the fence, right? The finance, the operations, and the business are actually on the same side. Now, the finance essentially, which was looking at from a capex perspective, is now looking at from an opex perspective. And at the end of the month is that the time they realize, oh, the bill is high, and they're now throwing it back to the engineering folks and saying that, boss, you have consumed it. Why don't you charge it? I'm going to charge you back. This needs to be changing, right? The finance and the operations and the developer needs to be actually together, wherein they need to be jointly goaled. Okay, this is the limit that you have set at the start of the month, and you essentially have consumed only 70% of it. So this is a reward that we actually give. So this is essentially one of the key ways wherein most of the teams essentially do well there. So you not only reward the engineer, you're actually rewarding the finance guy also. So they are essentially looking at the same metrics together, and you say that this is the target and this you achieved, and you essentially kept the cost below that. This is award for you. This is one of the most common ways to do it, and of course there are more smarter ways that each organizations are actually implementing.
Brilliant. Ravi, I'm seeing a next one that has come in for you, and this is more on the post-migration phase. Our audience member wants to know if you can provide some insights on this phase, such as the ongoing optimization, performance monitoring, and security maintenance aspects.
So from a post migration phase, right? Let us say workload is migrated to the cloud, and no longer you're using the development environment. Of course, is used less, and you're beginning to use the production environment more. So what essentially it comes to a case is how stable the system is, and vis-a-vis what is the business outcomes that, let us say, you launched an app, or let us say you launched a content-based service or an ad agency. How successful is the business outcome of it? And the success criteria is coming from the business, right? What is the viewership, how many clicks, so on and so forth. And then now the feedback goes back to the technology team stating that, wow, this is going on well, why don't you spin up more resources, and we need to make it. Now the team essentially on the infra side of it essentially is now going to call out, okay, this was a cost to make it happen, now these are the business outcomes. Now it goes back to the finance and says, now this is now they need to triangulate together, right? Now to scale it more, this is the cost implications, do you actually approve for it? So that's a cycle that actually goes around it. And now from a security standpoint, when the service goes live, there's something called as a defense in depth and zero trust security. So the services that we actually have built are largely with zero trust. What it essentially means is we trust nothing. We are not trying to take something on premise and move it as it is. A zero trust essentially is built from the ground to the up, where we trust nothing, and everyone needs to essentially validate and confirm that they are actually the trusted users. So this is actually a practice which is like a FinOps. This is actually a practice for security, which is running across the stack from compute to database to architecture and the operation command center around it. So that's a separate practice actually that we run as a best practice with the customers. And these are very strong pillars. DevOps used to be a conversation, let us say 10 years back. Now it's actually SecOps along with FinOps actually running other two pillars that make the organizations more stronger.
So I'm going to come back to one more question, but I'm seeing one that is related to what we've already spoken about right now. And what are some specific tools or methodologies that you recommend for managing and optimizing workloads across different cloud environments?
There are a couple of tools from a Google Cloud perspective, right? There is the Active Assist that we spoke about. Then these are actually AI-based tools which essentially are going to collect irrespective of the technology that you're using. It could be a marketplace product, it will be Google's own product. And then if you're looking at multi-cloud, there are other offerings that we work with third-party ISVs and marketplaces. And of course, SADA as an MSP would also be having some tools to make it happen. We essentially can look through these offerings so that the customer, because we essentially are from an open cloud mindset, right? We know that the customers would be multi-cloud. The customers would be having a couple of workloads with us and a couple of them with the other service providers. We are more than happy to collaborate, and essentially either the customer consumes our own tool, or else we expose these APIs to the tools that customers bring in, or we bring in a third party or a marketplace offering, which essentially can build it up for the customer.
Thank you, Ravi. Well, amidst all the questions, I'm seeing one encouraging piece of conversation here. One of our attendees says that it's a highly informative session and thanks us for it. Thank you very much for sharing your feedback. And with that, there is one more question that we have, which I would like to address. And again, this is open for any one of you to pick, Ravi and Amit. What are some of the best practices of establishing cost accountability and ownership within an organization, especially when they're trying to balance performance and cost effectiveness in their cloud operations?
Ravi, do you want to take that up?
Yeah, I mean, I would take the same example of the printer, right? I mean, every time we take a printout from the organization, there is actually the printer is a common infrastructure. In the same case, cloud is a common infrastructure. But at the center of the time, the cost center is being charged. The individual may not be charged, but the cost center is being charged. So the same logic actually getting extended from, of course, it's a canonical example, but at the same time, it's a similar example where in each of the tags that we are essentially, so when I go and take a print, right, you essentially are either presenting your ID card or a cost center or some code, which essentially uniquely identifies me. That I have consumed so many pages, it could be color, it could be double-sided, whatever. And then the cost center essentially is informed, and the IT essentially is going to charge back. A similar logic with tags, the alerts and the budgets that we spoke about essentially gets implemented. So the cost center owner essentially is now really accountable and responsible for the consumption he or she does. And they are essentially now not doing it for innovation only, but at the same time from a business mindset as well. So this essentially can be now extrapolated across the organization, and the chargeback concept essentially works really well.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I think that was the last question that we had from the audience. And with that, I'm going to come back to each one of you to just give me some key takeaways from the session as we wind this up. So, Amit, would you want to go in first?
So my favorite part would be actually to understand the challenges. Before working on something, it's important to see what exactly is the pitfalls. So I'll recommend everyone, and and unanimously it appears what I and Ravi think is that never treat cloud native as uh, as a big bang thing, which you need to launch it instantaneously and you see the results, suddenly. It should be considered as an ongoing journey where you have to repeat things, you have to see what is going on, you have to see what are the opportunities and how can you improve it. And once you get into this cycle of repeating things and seeing the scope of improvement, the challenges which we mentioned earlier could be very, very much dealt with. So yeah, let us see this as a journey of constant iteration, and we grow and we improve. Yeah.
Thank you, Amit. Ravi, your thoughts?
Hey, thank you, Amit. That's really insightful. So a couple of things that comes to my mind from this conversation is, right, one is you as a customer, you need to understand what's your cloud usage. That's bare minimum. And as we said, right, we need to be essentially having an information. Information is all about tagging and ensuring that who owns it. So at the end of the day, when the cycle is actually running, which we saw in the earlier conversation, is indeed stuck to it. And two is driving a culture of financial accountability and blamelessness, right? It's not that the bill spikes up and then people tend to, point fingers at each other. Each one of them are part of the same team. Concept of, the developer and the finance and the business essentially jointly owning it makes it much more productive, and the entire cycle of inform to optimize and then operate essentially operates really well. Thanks for this. Thanks for the time.
Well, thank you very much, Ravi and Amit, for your thoughts and for that very informative session. And we're seeing all the comments that are pouring in right away as well. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's time that we wrap this up. And throughout the conversation, ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed is that efficiency and strategic architecture together are what will be the defining piece of tomorrow's technological landscape. And while organizations strive to innovate towards architecting for tomorrow, navigating complexity is essential. And cloud environments have emerged as a crucial navigation tool in this complex landscape. And we've obviously, through the session, discussed the challenges and solutions, emphasizing the need for agility and foresight. Well, real world stories have also been presented, and of course the real world impact of it is in front of all of you, and these stories will definitely be inspirational to a lot of us in our own journeys within our organizations. I'd also like to thank the audience for their thoughtful questions and of course bringing in their piece as well, and hope that the sessions have been fruitful and insightful for all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to call this a wrap. And while we do that, we'd like to also tell you to please fill in the feedback form, which will appear on your screen shortly from now. And please feel free to mention any suggestions or recommendations that you have. This has been one incredible journey that we've packed in this 1 hour from start to finish, where we have explored the possibilities of what achieving escape velocity with Cloud at the core can do for our businesses. Once again, thank you very much, Amit and Ravi. And we're waiting for your feedback, ladies and gentlemen, which will show up on the screens right away. Thank you for being an active part of this. And I thank you on behalf of SADA, Google Cloud, and Strategy, and hope to welcome you at our forthcoming webinars and conferences. Until then, we wish that all of you stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.